This episode is made possible by our sponsor, Omega Bright Wellness. I've taken their omega-3 supplements for many years, and so has my wife, and that's why I invited them to sponsor my podcast. I'm proud to have them. You can find all of their products online at omegabrightwellness.com, and Bright is intentionally misspelled B-R-I-T-E, omegabrightwellness.com. This episode is also sponsored by Landmark College in beautiful Putney, Vermont. Learn more about the college of choice for students who learn differently at their virtual open house on March 19th. Register at landmark.edu/visit. Landmark.edu/visit. Or by clicking the link in the show notes. Hello, this is Dr. Ned Hallowell with a mini episode of Distraction. Today's topic is finding happiness during the pandemic. This was suggested by our very creative, imaginative producer, Sarah Gerton, and she said, why don't we talk about happiness today? And I said, okay, let's do that. On the face of it, how do you be happy in a pandemic? How do you be happy when you're supposed to keep distance, where you're supposed to wear a mask, where you're supposed to worry about getting sick and dying, where you're surrounded by people who are, in danger, all of us? How can you be happy? Well, it takes me back to one of my favorite characters, Epictetus. Epictetus was a Roman slave way back in the days of the Roman Empire. And he was crippled. He, had to perform labor all day, even though he was crippled, limped, hunchbacked. And yet, the guy was noticeably happy. He was so happy that his owner, some nobleman, wanted to know what his secret was. And he came up to him one day and he said, listen, Epictetus, if you can teach me your secret to happiness and teach me it well enough that it'll work for me, then I'll set you free. So Epictetus said, well, sure, glad to. The secret to my happiness is that I control what I can control, namely my thoughts. And I leave the rest to fate, to you, to the weather, to what have you. But I can control my thoughts. And so I direct my thoughts toward pleasing images, topics, ideas, and I direct them away from my pain and my suffering and my wretched state as a slave. Well, the nobleman, the owner, was so struck by the wisdom of Epictetus's philosophy that he freed him. And Epictetus spent the rest of his days walking around Rome, dispensing his wisdom. And other people wrote it down, and they collected his sayings. And in fact, they were so good that Roman soldiers would keep a pocket of a book of little pamphlet of his sayings in their breast pocket or whatever, their shield, and read them the night before they went into battle, to give them courage and hope and some kind of stability. And indeed, Epictetus went on to become one of the fathers of a whole school of philosophy called Stoicism. You may have read Epictetus when you were in college, or maybe even in high school. He's a very, very practical, wise, brilliant man. And I think of him when I think of being happy in the pandemic. I mean, we're not crippled slaves, Yes, we are living in danger, but we have it easy compared to what Epictetus had to deal with. And so maybe we take a page from his book and control what we can control. Makes me think of another one of my favorite lines about happiness comes from a rabbi who said, happiness is not having what you want. It's wanting what you have. And that's kind of a rephrasing of Epictetus. Instead of lamenting his terrible state, a slave, crippled in pain, serving someone else's every whim, instead of lamenting that, he decided to want what he had, which was an active mind, healthy enough to live and eat and sleep. And he turned that into an art form, if you will. The ability to be content, to be satisfied, to feel fulfilled, even in a state of extreme duress. Now, we're all in duress these days, no doubt about it. 500,000 people died. You know, it's a terrible pandemic. But I think one good thing that we can take from it is learning how to want what we do have, instead of bemoaning what we don't have. Instead of bemoaning and pining for the days when the pandemic is over, and of course we all wish for that, of course. But instead of lamenting and pining and complaining, maybe we take it upon ourselves to see this as an opportunity to learn the philosophy, science, art, whatever you'd like to call it, that Epictetus learned millennia ago. And make it our project day in and day out to find ways to direct our mind toward satisfying thoughts, activities, ideas, images, and away from the places of misery and complaint. I know I've taken up some new things during this pandemic. You know, like most people, I have time that I didn't used to have. And, for example, I now walk our dog once or twice a day. I didn't used to do that. And Max and I go out for these wonderful walks. In fact, I'll say, Max, you want to go for a little walk? The phrase little walk now, he just bounds up from wherever he is. That's something that I didn't used to do. I found some new TV shows to binge on with my son, who's home with us, and my wife, Sue. I've discovered some new recipes. In fact, tomorrow night I'm going to make sanganaki, which is a Greek cheese that you fry with a little bit of olive oil and lemons. These are ways of my wanting what I have, you know, and you know, I'm really become a fan of discovering joy in times of duress. You could say all of life is a time of duress. We're all living under the threat of being injured, diseased, and ultimately dying. So life itself is a time of duress. So how you find not just happiness, sort of a superficial word, but joy, fulfillment in the midst of this is to me all about learning how to want what you have. Well, one thing that I want that I have is you all, and thank you for listening. It means the world to me that I'm able to reach out to you. I hope you'll tell your friends about us. That's it for our mini episode. Thank you to our sponsor, Omega Bright Wellness. Save 20% on your first order with the promo code DISTRACTION at omegabrightwellness.com. Please keep sending us your questions and comments. Record a voice memo on your phone or write an email and send it to connect@distractionpodcast.com. You can find Distraction on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as well. Distraction is created by Sounds Great Media. Our producer is the delightful Sarah Gerton, who came up with the idea for today's episode. And our recording engineer and editor is the equally pleasant and pleasing Scott Person. I'm Dr. Ned Hallowell, and thank you, as always, so very much for listening. The episode you just heard was made possible by my good friends at Omega Bright Wellness. I take their supplements every day, and that's why I invited them to sponsor my podcast. Shop online at Omega Bright, and that's BRITE wellness.com.